All right, welcome back to the channel, everybody. I hope you have had a good week so far. Obviously, we're not done yet. We got one more day, but it's Thursday. Thirsty Thursday, right? That's what they say. At least that's what I used to say when I was younger. Now I'm sipping on coffee at 8 o'clock so I don't fall asleep, but, you know, it is what it is. It is what it is. So, I want to jump right into it. We got some important stuff to talk about. I want to talk about Joe Kent and his resignation and the reaction to it, you know, across some of the other talking heads. So he did an interview with Tucker Carlson, which was a really good interview. So we're going to like sample that some and chat about that. And we're going to get Dan Bongino's reaction from it. And Officer Tatum's reaction as well, because that one pissed me off and it pissed off quite a few people. So we're gonna jump right into it, as they say. All right. So Joe Kent resigned recently. Now you might say, who is Joe Kent? Well, he's basically an American badass. Okay, so let me just read some of his resume and his career from the wiki. So, Joe Kent is an American politician, former United States Army warrant officer, and former Central Intelligence Agency paramilitary officer who served as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. So that's what he just resigned from. A member of the Republican Party, yada yada yada. But let's talk about his military career, because that's really what's important to me personally. So at 17 years old, Kent enlisted in the Army on a Ranger contract, allowing him to enter the 75th Ranger Regiment. He applied for the Special Forces before the September, that day, I can't say it on YouTube, important day, and took the Q course days after the attacks. By September 2003, following his training, Kent was deployed to Iraq, where he fought in the first battle of Fallujah and searched for Iraqi officials. He served 11 combat tours, including deployments in Yemen and North Africa, before retiring. Kent held the final rank of Chief Warrant Officer. He later became a paramilitary officer in the CIA. On top of that, in December 2014, Kent married his wife, Shannon Smith, who was a cryptologist whom he had met at through the military, yada yada. She was also in the CIA, I believed, and she was killed in a suicide bombing in Syria. So when we talk about Joe Kent and if we should value his opinion on war, especially if we should value his opinion on war in the Middle East, I think it's without a doubt, yes, we should listen to this man. We should listen to this man. 11 combat deployments, all in the Middle East. Most of the time fighting against Iranian proxies, right? Like, when it comes to counterterrorism, this guy knows his shit. And on top of that, he is, when we think of an American war hero or American badass, that's Joe Kent. Right? That's him. And it's so sad to see that once he speaks up against the administration and he leaves, we'll get into that. It's so sad to see the smear campaign start up and all the discrediting and the spin happening and all that stuff. It pisses me off, honestly, because we might not, you don't need to necessarily agree with all of his opinions on things, right? But it's just so annoying when these people take a stand and they leave, how the smear campaign, it's so predictable, right? If you stand up to the current administration, you say, hey, I don't like what's going on, they just immediately are like, oh, you're an idiot. You know, we didn't care what you had to say anyways. You weren't very good at your job, blah, 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 right? So anyways, let's get into his actual, now that we know who he is, I'm pretty sure we all knew who he was, but let's get into his actual resignation letter that he wrote to President Trump, because I think it was not necessarily scathing, but it definitely, it was a little pointed, right? It didn't mince words. So let me read this. President Trump, after much reflection, I have decided to resign from my position as director of the National Counterterrorism Center effective today. I cannot, in good conscience, support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat, that's important, to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. I support the values and the foreign policy that you campaigned on in 2016, 2020, and 2024, which you enacted in your first term. Until June of 2025, you understood that wars in the Middle East were a trap that robbed America of our precious lives, of our patriots, and depleted the wealth and prosperity of our nation. In your first administration, you understood better than any modern president how to decisively apply military power without getting us drawn into never-ending wars. You demonstrated this by killing Soleimani and by defeating ISIS. Earlier in the administration, high-ranking Israeli officials and influential members of the American media deployed a misinformation campaign that wholly undermined your America First platform and sowed pro-war sentiment to encourage a war with Iran. This echo chamber was used to deceive you into believing that Iran posed an imminent threat to the United States and that you should strike now. There was a clear path to a swift victory. This was a lie, and is the same tactic the Israelis used to draw us into the disastrous Iraq war that cost our nation the lives of thousands of the best men and women. We cannot make this mistake again. So he goes on a little bit more to elaborate on his point. But boy, that was pretty interesting. I'm not really sure if anybody officially has come out and said what he basically said. And let's just see how President Trump reacted to it. I'm sure it was.
Well, I read his statement. I always thought he was a nice guy, but I always thought he was weak on security, very weak on security. I didn't know.
Thought he was weak on security. That's why we kept him around as the, counterterrorism head. Oh, yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, but I thought he seemed like a pretty nice guy. But when I read his statement, I realized that it's a good thing that he's out, because he said that Iran was not a threat. Iran was a threat. Every country realized what a threat Iran was. The question is whether or not they wanted to do something about it. Well, I read.
So again, he goes into the typical thing that Trump does, where he sort of compliments you out of the side of his mouth and puts you down the very next time. But it doesn't make any sense, because if he was supposed to be the head of the counterterrorism department, and you've thought he was always weak on security, why would you have him do that? It doesn't make any sense. And then there's some other things that he said and some other people said where that they had basically excluded Joe Kent from a lot of the most recent meetings and debate and planning for this Iranian excursion, we'll call it. But then again, that doesn't make any sense, because, well, if Joe Kent wasn't advising the president in his capacity, then who was doing Joe Kent's job of advising the president on those things? Right? Was it Tulsi Gabbard? I mean, she kind of said the same thing recently. She didn't come out and back up Joe Kent and say, yeah, I agree with him. But she also, she walked a very fine line of the whole imminent threat thing, right? She said, ultimately, it's the president's decision to say if something's an imminent threat or not. That was interesting. So let's hear from old Dan Bongino himself, because we know he's got to weigh in on things, right? So let's couple clips from old Danny boy.
The conclusions drawn in Joe Kent's resignation letter. This was some war for Israel and Iran is not a threat. Folks, I got to tell you something. I don't know what intelligence he was reading to come to that conclusion. He clearly had a different opinion in the past repeatedly.
It's almost like you can change your opinion based on evidence that comes in. Huh. Holy shit. That's amazing. That's a revelation right there. It's almost like you don't have to keep the same opinion for the rest of your life because things change. Holy shit. That's crazy. But one thing that will never change is how Dan did a awesome job of looking at the old Epstein evidence, right?
In podcast appearances and tweets where he indicated it was a threat. I mean, I don't know how you would come into that job with having drawn the conclusion already in podcast appearances and in your tweets that Iran's a threat. Read the intel, which he had access to, especially the foreign stuff, and then come to the conclusion Iran was not an imminent threat. Ballistic missile technology, the explosively formed penetrators, their drone technology advancing at a rapid rate, their anti-ship ballistic missiles, the shield they were building around their nuclear program. Even though their sites had been destroyed, they still had nuclear material over 400 kilograms. They were clearly looking to reconstitute.
So I think this is kind of interesting because this is what happens all the time. And it's honestly the politician's playbook, right? If you're ever questioning or against war, they automatically try to act like you are not a patriot and you're un-American. In reality, questioning going to war and pushing back and pumping the brakes is probably one of the most American things you can do. But they try to guilt you into that. And I'm reading this book. It's called, I think it's called We Are the Bad Guys, just to get a different look on history and especially America's involvement in foreign affairs. And it's interesting, but it talks specifically about that playbook where if you question war and you say, no, I don't think this is what we should do, suddenly you're not American, you're not a patriot, and you don't support the troops. Flat out. It's just like over and over again. Anyways, let's hear what Dan has to say. We all knew Dan was going to end up as a talking head on Fox News, right? He's got his podcast, but I haven't checked the numbers lately, but I'm pretty sure it's not doing as good as it was before he went into the government. But we all knew he would end up here. So let's see what he has to say.
Sacrifice is beyond reproach. That doesn't mean that this current opinion is any more fact-based, because it's not. I'm really sorry, Laura. I mean, I read probably a lot more intelligence than he did because they don't have a law enforcement function, the National Counterterrorism Center. They're an analytical clearinghouse. They're valuable. However, I had access to just about everything. And how you could come...
He had access to all the files. Wink, wink. You know what I mean?
To the conclusion that the Israelis did it and there was no imminent threat here? Really? What about the anti-ship ballistic missiles, the drone program, 440 kilograms of 60% enriched nuclear material, their constant death to America chance? I mean, you know.
Yeah, look, again, just because I might be not for this war doesn't mean I'm pro-Iranian government. And that's the other thing, too. If you say, I don't think we should have attacked now, they try to guilt you and say, well, what are you, Ayatollah worshiper? You're not American. And it's like, chill. I can not agree with the timing and the way that we went into this excursion. And that doesn't mean that I'm pro-Iranian regime and the government and Islam and all that stuff. They're two different things. There's two different things. And that really irritates me. And it's something that our politicians do very well. They insulate the issues in like this bubble wrap of accusations and guilt. And so if you say, hey, I don't know if we should be doing what we're doing, their immediate reaction is to tear you down and act like the two are the same. Like, no, I don't think we should invade right now. I think it was a dumb move. That doesn't mean that I loved what the Ayatollah was doing. It doesn't mean I support them killing their civilians. You know what? It's crazy.
That's called evidence. In some limited circles, we call that, a clue. I mean, I don't know at what point you thought this wasn't an imminent threat after you've read a lot of the stuff I read. And by the way, that's just the open source stuff we can talk about on the air. I promise you, the president, has a bevy of material that if he could do the Men in Black thing and erase your mind tomorrow, if he told you right now, you would come to the imminent threat conclusion in a snap.
Well, a senior U.S.
Well, thanks, Dan. That was very productive. Okay, so let's see. He goes on. He's got a couple more clips, right? He's got a couple more clips. This one, he's reacting to a clip of Joe from his podcast on Tucker Carlson recently. So let's just check this one out.
I mean, if
an attempted murder of a presidential
candidate, and then there's another assassination attempt. There's been multiple public breaches of President Trump's security over the last year.
Yeah, correct.
And then, Charlie Kirk is killed publicly in a very horrific way, and we're not really even allowed to look into that at all.
Okay. Listen, folks.
Dan's getting mad.
This part I have to just leave here. This is some of the most disgusting, unethical, and immoral stuff I have ever seen. Leveraging the death.
Which says a lot because he has seen the Epstein files. So for this statement to be some of the most disgusting, it's crazy.
Of my good friend, his brutal murder, his assassination, that the whole world watched in all of its horrifying gore. For your podcast appearance, you're disgusting. Thank you for your service to the country. You're also disgusting.
So basically, he's shitting on Joe Kent for talking about Charlie Kirk. And he's saying he's talking about Charlie Kirk on this podcast to, boost clicks and views and everything. That's what Dan is saying.
This is filth. This is just filth. I wasn't allowed to ask questions, Joe Kent. I'm just going to leave that there, folks. And all you people defending him right now, I'll accept your apology later. You watch.
Ooh.
You weren't allowed to ask questions? You sure about that? Sure you want that on the record, Joe? You weren't allowed to ask questions? Really? Go ahead.
Really even allowed to look into that at all. And Charlie Kirk was one of President Trump's closest advisors, and he also advocated heavily against a war with Iran. He was in the Oval Office.
He did? That's fascinating, because I've had conversations with Charlie too. I don't talk about them because the man's dead and I don't like to invoke his name for podcast clicks, okay? Only to remember him. And I'm not going to do it now. You sure that's how Charlie felt? Matter of fact, I've got a clip of Charlie. We're going to
You don't ever use Charlie Kirk's name, huh? To get more clicks or anything, right, Dan? I know you were about to use a clip to do your point, but here's a clip to do a counterpoint. So this is your first episode back from your little stint at the FBI, and what are you talking about? Oh, Charlie Kirk. That's weird. I thought you don't invoke his name, it's kind of weird.
That stuff. That was
hypocritical.
Charlie's memorial. I was sad out in Arizona. Oh, this one went viral. This was me walking out, and this lovely young lady had given me a Jesus statue, and her mom said, "Hey Dan, she's a big supporter," and
I remember that one. That one went nuclear on social media. So to
yeah.
that young lady, thank you for bringing a little bit of Jesus and warmth back into my life. It was a really somber ceremony. So we appreciate it. Folks, I can't do this show today without a couple of remembrances as well of folks we lost. Obviously, Charlie being first. Charlie was a great friend of mine. I'm not going to be, publishing any texts or
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like, you just got done saying that you don't use, we'll just say Charlie's name in vain, but then, yeah, your first episode back, you do. It's kind of weird. It's kind of interesting. So let's hear from some of the other talking heads on this side, right? These people that have all these really good opinions about Joe Kent. So let's hear from Brandon Tatum, Officer Tatum. Okay? So he has a podcast, he has a show. It's very popular. He's absolutely MAGA. He is definitely pro-Israel, but who isn't, right? We love Israel. Just gonna make sure nothing's gonna explode and kill me or something. All right, so let's hear what he has to say.
I think Joe Kent is a coward. I think he's a coward, and he should be ashamed of himself. He should be honored for his service that he committed to this country, but he's a coward for what he did. And then it had nothing to do with Israel.
He's a coward for basically saying, hey, I don't agree with this, I don't want to be a part of it, and stepping away. Look, words have meaning, and Joe Kent and coward don't go together. 11 combat deployments. His wife died doing this, right? Like, this guy, Officer Tatum, I believe he was a police officer for like 4 years or something like that. Respect to him for that, right? A lot of people don't become police officers. A lot of people don't enlist in the military. But to call Joe Kent a coward is fucking retarded. Like, how dumb does that sound? And there's another clip from him later that we're going to watch that it's even more dumb. But anyways.
I think what he said about us fighting the war for Israel is nonsensical. But people have a right to have a stupid opinion if they want to. But the fact that you think you a man, you think you doing something, you think it's honorable that you can say, I'm gonna resign because I don't believe in this, but the men and women who serve can't resign. You think you doing something. You're not a leader. You're a coward. You are a coward. It ain't got nothing to do with Israel. I don't care what he said about Israel.
Apparently you do care. Old Titty Tatum. Apparently you do care. I gotta play this next clip. Because it's more of the same. Yeah, it's more.
He says, Iran has been after Trump since January of 2020 after he ordered the targeting killing of terrorist Qasem Soleimani. This isn't a new threat. The Secret Service consistently failing to secure Trump is new. We need to figure out exactly why these failures keep happening. So what the do you mean that Iran has been after Donald Trump since 2020? What does that mean? If a country is after our president, that is a threat to America. What the are you saying? Whose side are you on then?
Yeah, Joe Kent. Whose side are you on? Are you not a patriot? I know you did 11 combat deployments into the sandbox and actually waged war against terrorism. But whose side are you on, man? What are you doing questioning things, Joe?
Whose side are you on? If our country decides to take a military action and kill Qasem Soleimani, which did not lead to a war, which all the cowards out there, both on the right and the left, swear to God we're going to get into a war. And I'm talking about an imminent world war. That's what they said we were going to do.
This was an inevitable conclusion. So by leaving our troops in these locations, undefended essentially, we left them there as bait because so many people in Washington, D.C. want to go to war with Iran. There's no other logical conclusion other than the fact that we have left them there as bait to be killed by Iranians at the time and place of their choosing so that we can continue to escalate.
It's the same thing with American troops, American interests, and people in the Middle East. If they weren't a threat to start with, it shouldn't matter where our troops are located. It shouldn't matter.
Yeah, that's right. We should be able to put our troops anywhere in the world we want to, and no one should be able to get mad. Now listen, I am not saying that Iran had any right to attack American soldiers and do whatever and all this stuff. But his little logic thing here of if Iran wasn't a threat, they would never attack, our soldiers anywhere in the world. Look, I don't think Joe Kent was ever saying they were not a threat. What he was saying is right now they were not an imminent threat. That's the difference. And they're splitting hairs over this whole thing, acting like he's stupid and doesn't think they're a threat at all. No, what he was saying is the timing of this is not supporting that they were an imminent threat right now, especially after we supposedly blew up their nuclear stuff, months ago, right? So they're like ignoring that part, and they're just saying, what do you mean they're not a threat? Look, they got all these drones, they got all these missiles and all this stuff. Yeah, they are a threat. But that doesn't mean you can just willy-nilly go into war with somebody. You have to have a strategy. You have to fucking plan it out a little bit. God, this guy is so stupid. So stupid. Anyways, let's let him finish.
About any of that. Because Israel or none of these other countries in the Middle East are trying to attack our troops and do any of this. Who else is doing this but Iran? And this guy knows that Iran is essentially had the capability and the desire to attack us. We should be able to put our troops anywhere, anytime without getting attacked. They are a threat. You tweeted that they want to hurt Donald Trump since 2020. President Trump has been clear and explicitly stated that he has strong and compelling evidence that Iran was going to attack the United States first. The evidence was compiled from many sources and factors. President Trump would never make the decision to deploy military assets against a foreign adversary in a vacuum. Iran is the world's leader, state sponsor of terrorism.
Yeah.
The Iran regime is evil. It proudly kills Americans, wages war against our country, and openly threatens us all, or threaten us all the way up to launching Operation Epic Fury. And you go down the list, Caroline Levy debunks a lot of the sentiment that was expressed in Joe Kent's statement.
Oh, yeah. She debunked it just by saying, now. President Trump would never do that. Ooh, such a strong argument. But anyways, I have some timestamps here because we're obviously not going to watch this whole Tucker Carlson interview. But there was some specific timestamps that I wanted to hit because it talks. It's the spots in the interview where Joe Kent talks the most about his view on what is going on right now and why he thinks this all started, and also what he thinks we need to do to get the fuck out of there. So let's start with this.
Attack on you, and it is an attack or refutation of your letter, is that, well, actually, Joe Kent was totally for using military action. He supported the Soleimani killing, for example. He seemed fine with the 12-day war, for example. So he doesn't have a problem on principle with an engagement with Iran. You're saying what to that? What's your response?
Well, I have no compunction about really fighting anybody who threatens our country, and the Iranians have posed a threat in the past, and the Iranians have a way of threatening America. They have the capability, and we always talk in the intelligence circles about capability and intent, what your enemy is capable of doing and what they actually want to do. And again, back to the data that we have on the Iranians, they used the escalation ladder. We saw that deliberately during the 12-day war. When they struck back after Midnight Hammer, it was very deliberate. They fired an equal amount of missiles as we dropped bombs on the nuclear facilities, and they basically hit a part of a base in Qatar that they knew we didn't have any troops on.
Yes.
They didn't want to escalate any further than we were willing to go. But also the Iranians, when they pose a threat to us, they usually do it with their proxies. And if their proxies stick their heads up and their proxies come after us, this is basically the Trump doctrine. We hammer them and we hammer their high profile leaders. Qasem Soleimani was highly effective and highly revered in Iran because the previous presidents, prior to President Trump, Obama and Bush, let Qasem Soleimani run around, raise proxy armies, kill Americans, and no one ever did anything to him. President Trump rightfully killed Qasem Soleimani. We got his deputy, Abu Mahdi Mohandas, who had American blood.
So here he is talking highly of past actions of President Trump, right? So it's not like he's a Trump derangement syndrome, a never Trumper, or anything like that. He supported these actions previously, and he's going to outline why he supported them. And it's important because everybody is trying to say, oh, Joe Kent's just trying to tear down Donald Trump. He's just trying to tear down Donald Trump. Look, not everything has to be about hating Donald Trump. I know there's a lot of people that hate Donald Trump, right? But you have to pay attention to this because he's giving Trump his flowers and saying, yeah, I agreed with this. I agreed with the 12-day war. This is why. So it gives credit to him when he says, I don't agree with this now, and here is why. I'm going to speed up the speech a little bit just so we can get through it a little faster. In
his hands, took them off the battlefield, but then President Trump stopped. He took those two key players off the battlefield, and he said, I'm not going to further escalate with Iran unless you escalate with us, knowing that if we struck Iran and we truly struck the regime, that would only strengthen the regime. So then President Trump did something that's incredibly smart, used that decisive military action, but then he coupled it with an economic package of sanctions, maximum pressure sanctions. And we can debate whether or not we should be using sanctions as the prime reserve currency holder or whatever, but he pressured the Iranians economically. After punching them in the mouth and showing, hey, I won't take this, I'm not Obama, I'm not Bush. If you cross a line, I will come after you. But then he really put the pressure on them economically. And if you look at the effect of the economic sanctions, that's what got the Iranian people on the streets actually protesting against the Ayatollah's government, which is ostensibly what we would like. We would like to see a bottom-up regime change where we get rid of...
Right. Bottom-up regime change. He's going to talk about this in a little bit, but he says specifically, and I agree with him, that in the past we knew that if we killed the Ayatollah, that it would actually galvanize everybody around that regime. Think about it. When has this ever worked where we kill a radical leader and the person that steps up and takes their place isn't as radical, if not more radical, right? If the Ayatollah's son is alive, which I guess is questionable, if he is alive, do you think he is going to say, hey, I know you killed my dad, but hey, it's water under the bridge, right? I know you blew my dad up, but I am going to turn over a new leaf and we're going to be a regime of peace. No, that's never the way that it works. Never.
Of the Ayatollah, but it's the will of the people, and they have a new successful government that's stable that we can deal with. The one way to throw that all out the window, and this isn't just Joe Kent's opinion, many scholars, and I think a lot of intelligence assessments have been written about this too, I know for a fact they have, is that if we struck the regime, it would only strengthen it. And that's not, I think that's just basic common sense. I mean, I think of myself, and probably you're in this camp as well, we didn't like Joe Biden, we didn't like Barack Obama, but if an outside force were to come in here and try and topple them while they were the president, I would 100% rally around the flag.
Exactly. That is such a good point. I didn't really think of it that way when I first watched it, because although our political parties could be a little extreme sometimes, I don't think of them as Ayatollah extreme, right? But it definitely is the same idea where if you're a Republican and someone came in and killed the Democratic president, you would still be extremely pissed off. And so now let's ratchet it up 20 levels, throw some radical religion on top of it and fanaticism, and let's see what we get with that.
That's just common sense. So if we wanted to strengthen,
you actually did. You just joined the military under Bill Clinton, whom I assume you didn't vote for.
Right.
Right. You joined in 1998. You've run the whole cycle of the war on terror, I noticed, and served out as an NCO. I think your entire
NCO warrant officer.
And warrant officer, 20 years. And I should just say, I hate ever to refer to a man's resume as like a data point because your ideas exist separately. But in this specific case, meaning you spend most of your time fighting Iranian proxies.
Yeah, a good deal of it, yeah.
Yeah. So you're aware of the threat from Iran. You have personally used violence against that threat.
I have.
Yeah. A lot of it, I think. And you supported the president's policy up until fairly recently.
Right.
And you've said that a lot in public. In fact, you went to work for him. He hired you.
Yeah.
Right. But here's from what I can tell is the central question: imminent threat. Now, the president has said many times to many people, including the public, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. I'm sure.
This is good. This is important right here, right? Because a lot of this, they cannot have a nuke. They cannot have a nuke. They cannot have a nuke was central in the decision-making process. So this is interesting.
He must have said that to you. You don't have to say it, but he said it to everybody. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Yeah. They can't have a nuke. Whenever asked, we say, let's just start here. They can't have a nuke. Okay, got it. Everyone agreed with that conceptually. Was Iran on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon?
No, they weren't, 3 weeks ago when this started, and they weren't in June either. I mean, the Iranians have had a religious ruling, a fatwa, against actually developing a nuclear weapon since 2004. That's been in place since 2004.
So I'm not definitely an expert on this, but what he's saying there, the fatwa, it's a religious law. And I guess if I was to like think of it a certain way, it would be like if the Pope made a law. So it's like not really a law, or maybe it's almost like a religious executive order. Maybe that's like the more comparison.
That's available in the public sphere, but then also we had no intelligence to indicate that fatwa was being disobeyed or it was on the cusp of being lifted. The Iranian strategy, it's actually pretty pragmatic. The Iranians are obviously aware of what's taking place in their region. And their strategy was to not completely abandon their nuclear program because they saw what happened to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya when he said, hey, I've got no more nukes. I'll do what you say. I'll give up my nukes.
And we gave him the Nobel Peace Prize?
Yeah, we regime changed him, and he was executed by his own people in the most horrific way.
Sodomized by a bayonet. Right. Okay. So that's the lesson I think that the entire region took from that when Hillary Clinton.
Unfortunately, that's what the neoliberal warmongers, that's the lesson that they showed everyone in the region. And then conversely, the Iranians also knew that if they came out and said, okay, we've got a nuke, whether they were bluffing or not, Saddam Hussein, Iraq right next door. So they kind of had
hung, I think.
He was hung by his own people, after a bloody war that's still essentially going on inside of Iraq. So the Iranians' position, when viewed from the lens of the region, was actually fairly pragmatic. They were preventing themselves from developing a bomb, but they still wanted the ability. They wanted the ability to enrich. They wanted the ability to have some components so that they weren't completely stripped of it. And when we always assessed.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting too. They wanted to, from what I understand and what Joe is saying, they almost wanted to like ride the fence of not completely not having the option of a nuclear weapon because in the world stage, obviously countries that have nuclear weapons are taken much more seriously. So they didn't want to totally say, no, we don't have any means of making a nuke. We are, in fact, very vulnerable, right? But at the same time, they didn't want to say that they were going to do it. So they wanted to like ride this middle ground where it was, hey, we still have the ability to do it, but we're not saying we're going to do it. They were trying to ride that line. It is my understanding of this whole enrichment thing.
That they were either several months or a year, 2 years away from actually being able to develop a nuclear weapon. And that's not because the Iranians are stupid people. I think we can tell right now that the Iranians are anything but stupid. They had the ability, I think, that the brain power to actually develop one, or they could have simply traded a ton of oil with Pakistan or someone else to actually get a nuclear weapon. They were not doing that. We had no intelligence to indicate that they were.
Then why was the president, was he told that they were on the brink of it? Why at the beginning of every conversation about Iran would the president say, I don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon? Why was that the
very good question? Why was he being told that?
Central question when, and you would know since you were the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, why would he say that if there was no intelligence or evidence that they were actually developing a nuke?
So a couple things. This is what I talk about in the letter about this ecosystem of information that's laundered through a lot of prominent neoconservative types that are very sympathetic to the Israeli cause, and then also Israeli government officials who give us things in semi-official channels. What they did was they created basically a shifting red line or a new red line. So that if the president's red line was Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, we've actually got a lot of trade space in there for a deal to be made because of what I just described with the Iranian policy. Essentially, the Iranians saying, okay, well, we don't want a nuclear weapon. Well, that means we basically are at a point where we can start negotiating and we can come up with a deal, and the president is a fantastic deal maker. So if your goal is to move us away from any kind of deal and your goal is to move us into a conflict, you have to shift that red line. And that's where a lot of this, I would say, what became a de facto U.S. policy of Iran can have no nuclear enrichment. It was laundered through a lot of the different talking heads, Mark Levin, Mark Dubowitz, you've got the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, you name it. Washington, D.C. has plenty of pro-Israeli lobbyists who will come and say those things, who will publish think pieces on it, who will go on the media, who will run op-eds in the Wall Street Journal to talk about this, why they can't have any enrichment whatsoever. And then we have a high degree of engagement with Israeli government officials who will come in and say, well, they're enriching and they could enrich or they could enrich more, and that will get them closer to a nuclear weapon. So then enrichment basically became the new U.S. policy. And the only official I've heard, and folks are welcome to look for this. That said this in the first Trump administration was Mike Pompeo. He said it. The president didn't say it. The president has been very consistent. He said they can't have a nuclear weapon. But again, like I said, that puts us at a place where we actually could have negotiations. And only President Trump, I think, could successfully have negotiations with Iran because he actually punched them in the face. And the Iranians had been walking all over us. They've been killing our soldiers. All of it is true. I have no sympathy whatsoever for the Iranians, what their proxies were doing. President Trump level set that when he killed Qasem Soleimani and he killed Abu Mohandas. The folks who wanted to push an actual regime change war in Iran knew this, and they knew there was a potential to get a deal, or there was a potential for President Trump just to continue the policy of maximum pressure sanctions, and if you come after us, we will hit you hard. And that got the protesters out on the street in Iran. And that's actually what the regime feared the most. I don't think the Ayatollah feared dying, not because he, is some crazy lunatic. I'm sure some degree of the Shia martyrdom culture played a factor in that. However, I think he knew that if he was killed, the regime would survive because the people would rally around the regime.
Well, there's been a lot of noise in the news lately, but none of it.
So I really liked that part because I didn't think of it that way because it was always exactly, they can't have a nuke. They cannot have a nuke. We cannot see a nuclear Iran. And we all agreed on that. But then, like he's saying, the red line or the goalpost started shifting, and now we're talking about enrichment. And he can only have this much enrichment, and that started walking back too, right? So I like what he was saying when it gave us wiggle room when we said, you cannot have a nuclear weapon. Because we can come to an agreement on that. But to take the enrichment away didn't let them sit on the fence anymore, right? And again, I'm not saying that we should be in support of everything Iran is doing. I'm saying the timetable for this conflict makes no sense. It makes no sense. And I think we're starting to see that now. It's a fucking mess. It's a fucking mess. So let me find the next clip here because it actually talks about Israel's role in feeding intel to our intelligence agencies and also the president. So let me find this. 3816. Try to get as close as possible. All right.
Knew, and they took President Trump very, very seriously.
So, I mean, I just think it's a remarkable thing to nail down because you're not some guy on Twitter. You're a senior, as of yesterday, you were a senior U.S. Intelligence official who's not hostile to President Trump, who's not going to here to write a tell book or launch a media career. So I think you're a sober voice on this. And just to be clear, there was no intelligence that showed imminent threat. There was no intelligence that showed they were on the cusp of building a nuclear weapon. There was no intelligence, indeed, that showed they were trying to build a nuclear weapon. And nobody said, I've seen it, but you haven't. It exists, but you just haven't seen it. Did you ever hear anybody say there is intel that shows this?
I did not know, but I know how this works. I know the Israeli officials, some in intelligence, some in government, will come to U.S. government officials, and they will say all kinds of things that we know from our intelligence just simply isn't true. And they'll say, hey, I'm giving you a preview. It's not in intelligence channels yet, but here's what's going to happen. And that doesn't usually come to
Wait a second. I mean, I thought that U.S. policymakers made their decisions on the basis of intelligence collected and or vetted by our intelligence. That's why we have intelligence agencies that soak up hundreds of billions a year. But
that would make sense, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it make sense? Wouldn't it make sense? It doesn't. I'll tell you what doesn't make sense. What doesn't make sense is listening wholeheartedly to another government whose intel agency has been responsible for lots of stuff. Won't even say, not all of it above board, we'll just say, right? Listening to them when they're like, you know what? I know you won't have any proof of this, and we don't have any proof of this yet either, but fuck those guys. They're going to try to kill you. Just trust us. Trust us. Gotta trust us. It makes no sense.
You're saying that Israeli officials short-circuited the entire U.S. government and just went right to American policymakers and said, it doesn't matter what your country says, here's what we know. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, usually they're pretty slick. And, and they'll say, hey, this isn't in intelligence channels yet because it's going to take some time to get there. And here, they're on the cusp of building a bomb. You know, they're going to, I don't know, you pick your topic. A lot of times they'll sample different things until they find what sticks. But in general, the narrative about, they're going to do a preemptive attack, or really just they're going to build a nuclear weapon. And if we don't stop them now, they're going to build a nuclear weapon. And enrichment is the pathway to that. They're going to continue enriching at whatever percent. Enrichment became the narrative. And so that hung up and that short-circuited and really sabotaged the entire negotiations because the Iranians basically said, like, we're not going to negotiate if the whole starting point is no enrichment. And again, that had nothing to do with a nuclear weapon, and the Iranians essentially agreed to that. So the Israelis came in, they moved that red line, and they would do a lot to say, like, oh, they're enriching, and you know what that means? That means in X amount of time, they could have a nuclear bomb. You have to ask now. And then the way the ecosystem would work is that the talking heads on TV, your Mark Levin's, Sean Hannity's, et cetera, they would say basically the exact same thing that night on TV, or there would be a piece written in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, that would say something very, very similar. Yet, if you looked in classified intelligence, we didn't see any of that.
Which is so crazy, right? It's so crazy that another government is so intertwined in our government that we are trusting their intel agencies over our intel agencies. How did we get to this point? How do we get to this point? It's crazy how involved they are in our own government, in our own affairs, in our own wars. It's bananas.
I mean, that must have been such a weird experience for you.
Bizarre.
Since you have access to the biggest and most powerful and presumably the best intel agencies in the world, and you're seeing people say things as fact when you know that they're not facts.
Right.
What was that like?
Infuriating. And I think that's why, in general, in the lead up to this last iteration, a good deal of key decision makers were not allowed to come express their opinion to the president.
Interesting.
Not allowed by whom?
I think it's important for me right now just to stay on the facts. I don't want to point names. I don't want this to become a name calling, or this guy did this on this day.
But any leader has gatekeepers, and so you're saying that you were prevented from bringing this information directly to the president by gatekeepers. Well,
there wasn't a robust debate. So in general, because our assessment really hadn't changed, we would send those up through intelligence channels. Everybody's kind of reading.
So that matches the narrative that they're trying to spin, that they had excluded him from any relevant meetings and discussions on this conflict, excursion, summer camp, whatever you want to call what we're in right now. But in fact, it's kind of true, but in fact, it wasn't necessarily because he was leaking things and couldn't be trusted. It was because the people that were in Trump's ear made it so that the circle got very small, and they were so convinced of things that they didn't really want to hear outside opinions that even differed from what they were being told by this select group of people. Like, I believe Bibi went to the White House like 7 times leading up to this, right? And I know Tucker asked Joe in this interview if the Israelis met with Trump more than Joe's department did. And Joe basically was like, I can't say for sure, but it pretty much sounded like that.
Reading the same intelligence, but then what actually gets briefed to the president can be very, very different depending on who and how it's delivered. And without a level set from the intelligence community, someone like D&I Gabbard coming in and saying, Mr. President, like, here's the full scope of the intelligence, and what it means, you're kind of lacking that sanity check of where we're at, or at least a good sampling, to gauge how accurate what the Israelis are saying is. And that process, in my view, was largely stifled in the second iteration. There was robust debate and robust discussions leading up to the 12-day war into Midnight Hammer. But the second round, to me, and I'm sure others will refute this and disagree with me, but what was conducted by just a handful of advisors around the president.
That is true.
So that's interesting, because I played a clip a little while back when this first kicked off of Tucker talking about how he went to Israel and talked to Mike Huckabee and all that stuff, and then he came back and he attempted to talk to Donald Trump to talk him out of it, and somebody told Tucker, like, don't even bother. He's only pretty much listening to Fox News and only a couple people in his ear. He's not going to listen to anything else. So Tucker was saying that, and now Joe Kent is saying that, and it both lines up. I'm assuming that there's some truth to that, right? I mean, you can't believe everything, but there seems to be some truth. So now I'm going to skip forward to the part where Joe talks about his opinion of how we can get out of the war. Let me see if I can find this real quick. What about here? Let's see.
That's just not the case right now.
No, it's not. So I want to end with a hopeful note. So we've been talking about this for 24 hours, because I think that without even getting into it, anyone who's followed it carefully and is thinking clearly can see that the war with Iran is potentially like the end of a lot for the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we could overstate the consequences of this.
Right.
And I don't think I'm being hysterical. I've had 3 weeks to think about it. I've actually had 10 years to think about it because that's how long they've been pushing for it. So at this point, it feels like there's no way out. But you were saying to me this morning in a really thoughtful way that gave me hope that you think there is a way out. And so I'm going to stand back and let you explain how you think that the United States can exit with a lot of its interests intact and its honor intact and the president's administration intact, because the political cost of this is shocking. I mean, it's not the most important thing, but like right now it's all very broken. Okay. What's the answer?
It's going to take drastic action. And the good news is I believe that this is something that President Trump is uniquely qualified to fix on his own through his sheer willpower. President Trump has an amazing ability. It's almost his superpower, I think.
So again, before he explains, listen to how much credit he gives President Trump. This whole thing that he's anti-Trump and all this stuff is quite bullshit when you hear all the praise that Joe Kent gives President Trump.
Think to be able to kind of breathe life into ideas and again to capture large data sets and to find leverage. And right now it's clear that this conflict will just continue the way it is and get exponentially worse, especially if we go down the path of demanding a total surrender with boots on the ground or maybe even something far worse. What President Trump
and that is the path we're on.
I mean, inevitably, if we say it's total surrender, what does total surrender mean? Now, again, this is where President Trump is uniquely suited. President Trump can define his own total surrender. He's in charge. I ended my letter with, you hold the cards, because President Trump truly does hold the cards. He's a very powerful, very respected leader. And what I think President Trump must do is number one, he has to address the main issue. The main issue is what the Israelis are doing. And he needs to very forcefully, and probably with a new team of diplomats, go to the Israelis and say, you're done. We will defend you. We will make sure that, ballistic missiles aren't rained down upon you. However, you are done going on the offense, because
oh, that's pretty spicy, Joe. That's pretty spicy. I agree with you. We're going to talk more about that later. But yeah, he's getting into it.
This is our war. We're paying for it. We're bleeding for it. This is not your war. If you choose to continue this offensive operation, we're out. And as a matter of fact, if you choose to continue, we will start withdrawing features of your defense system so that you will be on your own. We have to say that to them. And we have to be very blunt. We have to be very forceful. And I know a lot of people who like the Israelis, are going to say, we can't do that. That's wrong. They're under fire, et cetera. But if we don't do that, if we don't address our relationship with the Israelis, even if we come up with a temporary ceasefire, we'll be right back in the same situation in very short order. So that's the first thing that President Trump must do, address the main issue. The main issue is how the Israelis are out of control and they are driving this entire war. Address that aggressively, get the Israelis to stop.
How realistically, just having lived through this whole thing, how hard will that be?
It will be hard, but again, President Trump can do it. President Trump can call the Prime Minister of Israel and get him to the table. President Trump can force it. I believe that. I truly believe that he can. So I think it's doable. It's only doable with President Trump. And then from there, once we get the Israelis to stop, we still, for now, have strong allies in the Gulf. We have.
Look, I agree with what he is saying, but I think it is a little bit pie in the sky, simply because of how much money Israel has given most of our politicians. I don't know how we're going to dig our way out of that relationship, right? Like, that's crazy. It's almost like breaking up with an ex, but she like purposely leaves half her shit at your apartment still, so she keeps having to like pop in, swing by, and you're like, my God, like, I thought we broke up. Yeah, but my couch is still there.
The Emiratis, the Qataris, the Saudis, the Bahrainis, all these actors, the Omanis, they may not always agree with each other, but they're all pretty good partners with us. I think we need to use them. And again, I think we probably need to bring in some new diplomats, and we need to aggressively engage with the Iranians while we can to get to a ceasefire and to come up with a way that we can stop the killing, we can stop the destruction of not just these countries, not just the loss of more life, but basically the collapse of the energy system that we have right now.
Yes.
So that we can open the Straits of Hormuz back up again.
We're
and so that we can
about that
make sure the petrodollar is being used. Because right now we didn't stop the flow of oil going to the Chinese. The Chinese are still getting their oil out. And they're settling those transactions in yuan, not the petrodollar.
Yes, that is so bad. So bad. That is not a good look for America. If they stop using the petrodollar, we are in some serious trouble.
So we have to, once we get the Israelis to stop, we have to aggressively pursue our economic interests. And I think the only good thing in here is that our economic interests are in line with not just the GCC countries, but also with the Iranians. Because the Iranians want this war to stop. They want to be able to rebuild their energy sector. They want to be able to revitalize their energy sector. And on this mutual cooperation to open up the Straits of Hormuz and to build back the energy sector, I think we could come up with a peace.
We'd have to lift some sanctions.
We have to lift some sanctions, yeah.
And why wouldn't we? We've had sanctions for decades. And according to the neocons, they had no effect on the nuclear program, which posed an imminent threat. So, what is the argument? We've had sanctions for decades, and I don't see how we benefited from that at all.
We didn't. I mean, we just lifted sanctions on Syria because the regime changed there, but we lifted sanctions on a guy who used to be the former leader of Al-Qaeda.
Right, because he's pro-Israel.
So I'm pretty sure we can go ahead and lift some sanctions. If it would be in our benefit to lift the sanctions, because not only would it help us in the war, but also a condition of lifting the sanctions would be you will settle all transactions that you're going to get from your new oil industry that will be reintroduced to the world economy. You'll settle that in the dollar. And we need the
Yes. Okay. So that's Joe's plan to get out of the war. I agree with him. In a perfect world, that's what we would do, right? But I don't think it's realistic at this point, and I don't know how to get their money out of our government, but that would obviously need to happen first. We would need to, in order for us to have the ability to tell Israel what to do and draw that line in the sand, we can't have our politicians bought and paid for. On top of that, no way to prove this, right? But the timing of this seems quite interesting, and I'm just going to throw this out there. We know Epstein was a Mossad agent for Israel, and we know that President Trump was all through the files. We also know that not all of the files have been released, right? So what if the timing of this fit where Israel said, listen, we already know, according to Marco Rubio, that Israel said that they were going to attack Iran, like with or without us. And so that made us say, okay, well, hold on, we'll do it too. But what if the timing had something to do with leverage of releasing some files that maybe Trump doesn't want released? You know? I don't know. Just throwing it out there. It would be, the timelines would match up and it would make more sense why we just decided now was the time. You know what I mean? Because obviously Israel's been wanting to do this for a long time. Suddenly we're like, yeah, let's do it now. Because they have nukes, but we blew up their nuclear capability a couple months ago, but somehow in 6 months they were able to get back to the point where they're a threat again, which means we can't really stop their nuclear program, but let's keep trying. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. All right, so now I want to talk about the Strait of Hormuz and how absolutely screwed this makes us and the economy and all that stuff. I want to kick it over to Nate from Valhalla VFT, former Green Beret. This guy knows his shit. I'm a big fan. So let him explain the Strait of Hormuz and what's going on there from his perspective.
Let's actually take a look at what's really going on in the Strait of Hormuz right now. All right, so the Strait of Hormuz, as we know it, okay, of course you have Iran to the north, then you have the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, all of our Gulf allies that come across here. And what is the big problem with the Strait of Hormuz? Well, what has happened is that Iran dropped tons of sea mines all the way through the main part of the Strait of Hormuz here. This is completely shut off for the most part for all ships. What does that then mean? Well, there is actually only one small channel for all these oil tankers to come through. That's here. All of these tankers are required to now pass right through this tiny little channel that is right off the coast of Iran, which again...
See, I didn't know that part. I guess I didn't put it together geographically. I knew they were talking about putting mines, but I didn't realize that forced all of the ships through a smaller section of the strait. I had no idea. So that's some really good info.
Anytime the West and its allies has tried to push oil tankers through here, they've been attacked and destroyed by Iran.
Also, good point. I don't know if there's any proof that they have actually officially mined. However, the threat alone is enough to have all of those oil tanker companies get their insurance policies canceled, and no company wants to sail a multi-million-dollar boat through something that might be mined. So either way, if there's mines there or there isn't mines there, the threat alone of there possibly being mines there kind of does the same thing for now anyways.
So what has that done? Well, it's made it so the United States Navy can't actually do anything to help escort any of these oil tankers through. But what it is allowing is for all of Iran's allies to go ahead and let oil through their pass here. So China, Russia, all of Iran's allies are continuing to have free flow of oil while the United States and the Western world is completely shut off. Now, economically, we're all very, very well aware of what that means, right? We can all go down to the gas station and see for ourselves. Here in Oregon, gas has raised $2 a gallon from where it started just in the last 20 days since the war started. That number is going to continue to climb and climb and climb. That's just for America, though, and we actually aren't as reliant as oil coming out of the Middle East as literally all of our allies, especially in Asia and Europe. So what we're really doing here is absolutely skull-fucking our allies and their economies, so that even some of those countries like the United Kingdom and Japan and Korea are already doing gasoline restrictions because gas.
So I knew this was gonna affect some of our allies, but he lays this out very clearly and visually, and it made a lot of sense to me. Again, geographically, how the oil flows from the strait to our allies, and it's not good. It's not good.
Gas is already in such a big shortage because of this. And I'll show you why. Okay, so let's look at the actual supply chains of oil and how they work here. So you can see up here, Strait of Hormuz completely shut down. We know about 20 to 25% of the world's oil comes out of here. And by worlds, we mean the vast majority of the Asian world. But that 20% is a little bit misrepresented because we need to understand where the majority of that 20% is going. And to our allies, China, etc. And as it comes out of here, the Strait of Hormuz, as you can see, it is very, very close to places like Pakistan, India. It then travels to the southern portion of India and goes through what's called the Strait of Malacca. So again, as it's left, the Strait of Hormuz out here hits Pakistan, India, comes through, and that oil supplies Bangladesh, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Australia, the Philippines, comes up through the South China Sea, goes through the Strait of Taiwan, obviously then supplies Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and China as well. So again, this is going to massively affect what our allies are going to do. If we look at this, you can see like close allies like Japan, 70% of Japan's total oil imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. 95% of its oil comes from the Middle East, specifically Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Kuwait. And the only route out, Strait of Hormuz. And the same goes for pretty much all of our Asian allies. Why is that?
Not good. That's not good to have it that constricted, or the ability for a country that we're at war with right now to shut down something like that. I knew it was bad, right? I knew it was bad, but it didn't click how bad it was until after I watched a couple videos on it and realized how dependent a lot of our allies are on oil flowing through there.
Is that a big deal? Well, again, China's vessels are still flowing through, so they're not being negatively impacted at all, but our allies like Taiwan and Japan and Korea are getting absolutely fucked. And what do you think they're going to do eventually? Well, if I had to guess, they're not going to join the war because they've already said no, but Iran has now offered an out to U.S. allies, and this is where the future of the world could drastically change after this conflict.
This is so bad. This right here, this made sense to me, and I'm like, fuck, this is so bad.
This is the most impactful thing that's happening in the war, and if nobody's told you about this, then you should stop watching their media channels. And this was as of about 3 days ago when Iran announced that it was willing to open the strait to U.S. allies on one condition, that they buy oil in the Chinese yuan. Well,
that is so bad. So bad. We do not want that. We do not want that one bit. And that is a huge bargaining chip for Iran. All Iran has to do at this point is just survive. Just survive. And they have a good chance of surviving if we don't do a ground invasion, right? They'll just be like, yeah, whatever, man. Drop these bombs, blow this shit up, whatever. You know, we will keep plugging along. You'll go away eventually, and guess what? We'll still have control of that strait. We'll still have control of a lot of the world's oil. So, fuck off. Not good.
12 nations agreed within 48 hours. Yesterday, this was confirmed as India has now been the first U.S. ally that is now shipping oil out of the Strait of Hormuz after purchasing it in the Chinese yuan, not the U.S. petrodollar. So again, this is massive and should be alarming to every American. And why
Extremely.
is that? Well, if you know anything about how America's power actually is held on the global stage, it is because oil is sold in the U.S. dollar, the petrodollar. And then
Right, exactly. So, like I was saying, basically all Iran has to do is just survive, and then afterwards, let's just say this, okay? President Trump's like, okay, we've won. We've won, we're leaving. And Iran's like, okay, yeah, I mean, cool, you can leave. But we are not giving you any oil through this. And then, through the Strait, because the Strait will still be theirs. We're not giving the U.S. any oil. And matter of fact, we're not going to give any of the U.S. allies oil if they pay in the petrodollar. We're basically going to switch it over, force the switch to the Chinese yuan, and make our allies capitulate with that. Because they need that oil, right? They need that oil more than we do, but it affects the whole global economy and all that stuff. But that is such... We are in... I don't think a lot of people understand this, and I'm no expert, but I'm watching these videos and I'm giving the information to you guys. I don't think people understand we're in a point now where if we do not obliterate Iran, there really isn't a walking away from this unscathed. And by unscathed, I don't mean deaths of soldiers and stuff like that. I mean, are we going to be a world superpower still? Because if they fuck with the petrodollar and switch it over, it is going to be devastating to our economy. And they absolutely have the power to do that, which is crazy. And taking over the Strait, like this whole thought that we will just escort ships through and that'll make everybody still go through and nobody will be worried about it anymore. It's kind of bullshit because the geography of Iran right there is extremely mountainous along the coast, right? And so in the mountains, they have the ability to have little shitty launchers, and all they need to do is do damage to a ship once in a while, and no one will go through that strait. They don't even have to massively do amounts of damage that's sinking ships like crazy. Just once in a while, shoot a rocket, hit a ship. That's it, right? In order for us to completely stop that, for one, there's no way we would do it without boots on the ground. It's impossible. One of the reasons our Iron Dome works so well it was working so well, is because of the lead time that our interceptor missiles had. So we had, 15, 18 minutes to detect the launch, figure out where it's going, lock on to the missile, shoot our missile, and hit it. However, if the missiles are up in the mountains right at the coast, instead of 18 minutes, now it's 2 minutes, right? So 2 minutes to detect the launch, lock onto the missile, shoot our missile, blow it up. It's very, I don't want to say impossible, but it's not an easy thing. So us locking down the strait and escorting ships and stuff, I don't think that is actually going to be a strategy that works, right? I don't think it's going to be a strategy that works. And then on top of that, Israel keeps acting like that one friend that you bring to a bar that always drinks too much and starts punching people in the face, and suddenly you get in a fight and now you're getting punched in the face, right? Israel is acting like that. And I was thinking about this, and it reminded me because just recently, Israel keeps escalating things, and I am not positive, but I feel like this is the first time we've been in a military conflict like this, where we are not the top dog leading the show, and our allied forces are just, you know, extra men and extra weapons and stuff like that. Israel's doing things on their own. They're punching people in the face at the bar on their own, and now we're having to deal with it, right? So, do you remember when this is before I think it was before the 12-day war kicked off? Maybe it was afterwards. Might have been afterwards. I just remember this because the clip was friggin' hilarious of Trump. Let me see if I have it. Do I have it here somewhere? Give me 1 second. I'm pretty sure I have the clip. So this was, yeah, here it is. All right, so let me set this up. So remember, this was basically Trump was trying to act tough and play the middleman between Israel and Iran. And he was basically like, you all need to chill out. Like, that I am ordering a ceasefire. Like, this is going to happen, right? And then Israel went and they went and bombed Iran anyways. And then Iran fired some missiles back in retaliation. And then we got this clip, this epic clip.
Israel says that Iran violated the peace agreement and the ceasefire agreement. Do you believe that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
I mean, it's such an accurate clip. Such an accurate clip. But anyways, to go along with my point here, Trump was, nope, we're doing a ceasefire, and kind of trying to like throw his weight around a little bit. And Israel was like, yeah, bro, watch this shit. Pew! Right? And then Trump's pissed off because obviously it makes him look bad, and then it escalated things. So now again, Marco Rubio says Israel was going to attack regardless. So they're again going out. They're escalating things. Then just recently, Israel bombed the South Pars gas field, which is infrastructure, right? We're over here saying we're not going to purposefully attack infrastructure. And then Israel's like, yo, hold my beer, bro. You guys might not, but we are, right? And then that makes it even harder for us to come to the table with Iran and say, all right, listen, guys, we got to back out of this, right? And then there was, this is unconfirmed, so I'm not really sure. Like, I think Israel and the United States both denied this, but Iran was saying that we blew up a desalination plant on Keshem Island, which was back a little while ago before this gas field attack. So it just seems like they're just doing, and then they did something in Lebanon too. But that was anyways. They are acting like the friend of the bar that gets far too drunk and just starts punching people randomly, and then you have to defend for yourself. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be so difficult to get out of this. And I support our troops 100%, right? But that doesn't mean I have to support them being there. I don't want any. If we're going to be there, I want to win, right? I want to win. And I don't want to lose troops, and I don't want any deaths and all that stuff. That's an American point of view. But I also feel like I should be able to say I don't think we should be there. The timing was not right on this. And the shitty thing is, if we think of it this way, right? If we think of it this way, over the years, the threat of us attacking Iran has been there. And you have to think, to some degree, it was keeping them controlled. To some degree, the threat of us going in there and attacking them was what was keeping the strait open. Might have been what was keeping them from not actually having a nuclear weapon. But this haphazard attack basically played our hand. We laid our cards down, and it's not looking like we can do anything to stop them. So how they're not going to be emboldened and empowered by this when it's over is beyond me. Again, that like forces our hand where we have to basically annihilate them. We have to win now. Because if we walk away surrendering, what leverage do we have? What leverage do we have? You know? We're blowing up a lot of things. We're blowing up a lot of things, for sure. But at the same time, it doesn't look good. You know? No, it doesn't give me a lot of confidence that we could win that. Our track record lately has not been that great. And has nothing to do with our military capabilities. It's all decision-making and politics, right? For us to be fighting the Afghan war for 20 freaking years and then replace the Taliban with the Taliban, and then on top of that, give them a bunch of money every week. It's something crazy. It's millions of dollars that we're just giving to them through NGOs, which is the biggest bullshit thing in the world. And then, you know, like what was all that for? So already we don't have a great track record with this. And we're wanting all of our allies to step up and help us. Get this. We want all of our allies to help up and help step up and help us. But at the same time, we knew that this whole thing was going to really fuck with them. And we didn't care what they thought. So now they're having to deal with the mess that we started, right? Financially, economically, gas prices and all that stuff. Then besides that, we've been marching around talking about taking Greenland from our ally by force if we have to. Maybe Cuba. We did the Venezuela thing. Like, it's kind of like the bully, and I'm going to draw an analogy. It's kind of like the bully picking on everybody on the playground and then asking some of those people you picked on to help. You know, it just doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. Anyways, I looking at the chat, definitely I agree with most of everything people have been saying. I guess we'll just buckle up. Because unfortunately we don't have any say in it. And yeah, I'm kind of nervous for this one. To be honest. If they didn't have the Strait of Hormuz and that key piece, I really wouldn't be that worried, because I do realize that we are going to have some possible backlash from attacks on the homeland and stuff like that. Can't use certain words on here because it will get shadow banned, but certain attacks on our soil, I do realize that is a possibility, right? That it could happen, but I'm far more concerned with the financial side of things. And if there's already been talks about them switching off the petrodollar, like it's already been a worry for, I don't know, at least like a decade. So it's always been a threat. You know, it's kind of, that's what scares me. That's what scares me. But that's all I got for you this week. That's all I got for you. I appreciate you guys swinging by, hanging out, chatting. Love it. If you want, I do this every Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Give me a like, give me a subscribe, drop a comment. That'd be amazing. And I will catch you all next week, and hopefully with some good news, but probably not. But either way, there'll be some drama. So